Why is Ecclesiastes often described as the most brutally honest book in the Bible? What is it about its tone, its reflections, and its relentless questioning that distinguishes it from the rest of Scripture? For centuries, readers have turned its pages and found not simple answers, but a mirror, one that reflects the complexity of human existence without apology. Ecclesiastes dares to ask what many would prefer to leave unspoken. Is life truly meaningful, or are we clinging to illusions? Can wisdom, wealth, or work secure lasting fulfillment, or are we simply chasing shadows? These are not surface-level questions. They are the kinds that linger late at night, that stir unease even in hearts of faith. And yet, within this unsettling inquiry, something sacred unfolds. At the center of Ecclesiastes stands the voice of a figure known as the teacher. Traditionally understood to be Solomon, the son of David and king in Jerusalem. This character is introduced not with titles of divine favor or national triumph, but simply as one who has seen much and has chosen to speak. Solomon's legacy as a man of extraordinary wisdom, unmatched riches, and vast accomplishments gives weight to his reflections. If anyone had the credentials to speak on what life has to offer and whether it satisfies, it would be him. And yet, his voice throughout the book is not one of pride, but of weariness. He has tasted all the world can offer, and now he speaks not to impress, but to warn. Ecclesiastes is part of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, alongside Proverbs and Job. But unlike Proverbs, which often speaks in moral clarity, or Job, which centers on the problem of suffering, Ecclesiastes takes a different approach. It walks the reader into ambiguity, into paradox, into tension. It refuses to tie life's difficulties into neat conclusions. Instead, it opens space for the kind of wrestling that often happens in private, wrestling with the passage of time, the emptiness of success, the certainty of death. In doing so, it reflects something many readers quietly carry: the experience of living with questions that have no easy answers. One of the most distinctive features of Ecclesiastes is its tone. Where other books of the Bible lift with praise or unfold divine revelation, Ecclesiastes sighs. It does not deny the presence of God, but it does not always feel his nearness. The teacher speaks not from the heights of vision, but from the depths of experience. He observes a world where justice is delayed, where toil seems futile, where both the wise and the foolish meet the same end. And yet, he speaks with integrity. He names what others might deny. He says what few spiritual texts dare to admit, that much of what we do, love, and build will one day fade away. Yet this honesty is precisely what makes Ecclesiastes so powerful. It does not try to silence the tension between faith and doubt. It brings that tension into the light. In a world that often promises easy answers or quick solutions, Ecclesiastes insists on something more authentic. It suggests that true wisdom does not begin with certainty, but with humility. It does not offer escape, but invites the reader to remain present in the discomfort. And through that discomfort, something deeper begins to emerge: not despair, but a redefinition of meaning. Not resignation, but recalibration. At its core, Ecclesiastes presents a profound paradox. It is a deeply spiritual book that, at times, sounds disarmingly skeptical. It speaks of God's sovereignty, but questions the purpose of human striving. It affirms joy in small things, yet describes all as hevel, a Hebrew word meaning vapor, breath, fleetingness. In doing so, it calls the reader not to abandon faith, but to mature in it, to move beyond surface certainties and into the kind of trust that remains even when understanding does not. This is not the kind of faith that demands proof. It is the kind that holds on, quietly, when everything else feels unstable. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. With these arresting words, the voice of Ecclesiastes opens a dialogue that lingers not only in the ears, but in the bones of the listener. It is not the kind of sentence one glances over. It is a sentence that demands attention, that halts motion, that causes the reader to lower the book for a moment and wonder, is this really in the Bible? And yet, there it is, echoing through the ages, a refrain that surfaces throughout the text with deliberate persistence. The Hebrew word at the center of this refrain is hevel, often translated as vanity or meaningless. Its literal meaning brings forth a richer image: vapor, breath, mist. It suggests something transient, something insubstantial, something seen for a moment and then gone. To translate hevel simply as meaningless does not do justice to its complexity. It would be a mistake to assume that the teacher is declaring life to be completely without value. The word points instead to life's elusiveness, its inability to be grasped or pinned down. Imagine a breath on a cold morning, visible for an instant before it fades into nothing. That is the picture drawn here. Life is not without purpose, but it resists control. It defies our attempts to secure it, to make it permanent, to draw straight lines through it. In this sense, the phrase vanity of vanities is not a nihilistic cry, but a poetic acknowledgement of life's fragility and unpredictability. This insight, however, can be unsettling. There is something in human nature that craves permanence. We want our work to last, our names to be remembered, our actions to have lasting consequence. But Ecclesiastes opens by stripping these desires down to their naked reality. The teacher does not flatter the ego. He does not affirm the illusion that any of us can build something immune to time. Instead, he states plainly that all things are hevel. Everything humanity does is, at its core, marked by impermanence. For many, this can sound like despair. To be told that life is vapor may feel like standing on shifting ground. But perhaps the teacher is not pulling the rug out from under us, but rather inviting us to see clearly where we have been standing all along. The truth is, much of life is uncertain. We plan, and our plans fall through. We work, and others reap the reward. We love, and are hurt. We build, and time wears it all away. These are not just poetic ideas, they are experiences that touch every human life. The teacher simply refuses to look away from them. He writes not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of unflinching honesty. What Ecclesiastes offers, then, is not the conclusion that life is meaningless, but that meaning is not something easily found in the places we usually seek it. The repeated invocation of hevel acts like a spiritual lens, bringing into focus the ways we chase shadows. We devote ourselves to careers, to possessions, to appearances, believing that they will grant us significance. But the teacher, having walked all those roads, tells us what he found: vapor. Not because life lacks beauty or goodness, but because the things we pursue often fail to deliver what they promise. They are temporary by nature. And when we demand permanence from the temporary, we are always disappointed. To call everything hevel is to say that it cannot be held. It is not to say that it is worthless. A breath is not worthless. A mist curling in the morning sun is not without beauty. They are simply not meant to be captured or kept. This distinction matters. It transforms the message of Ecclesiastes from one of despair to one of reorientation. If we are willing to accept that life cannot be controlled or preserved, we may begin to live it more fully. If we recognize that all things are fleeting, we may begin to cherish them more deeply. The presence of hevel in all things does not rob life of meaning, but rather challenges us to find a different kind of meaning, one rooted not in permanence, but in presence. There is also a profound theological thread running through this understanding of hevel. The Bible is filled with imagery of breath and wind, especially in relation to the divine. In Genesis, God breathes life into man. In the Psalms, the Spirit of God is described as wind moving across the earth. Breath is sacred, even as it is fleeting. In Psalm 39 verse 5 it says, "You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you." Everyone is but a breath, even those who seem secure. This is the same word, hevel, the same recognition. It is not an insult to humanity, but a call to humility. To live with the awareness that we are not eternal, and that our time is limited, is to live more wisely. Ecclesiastes stands in stark contrast to the self-assured voices of culture that promise success, happiness, and fulfillment through effort or consumption. It refuses to lie. It tells the truth that even when we have what we thought we wanted, we may still feel empty. This is not because life is meaningless, but because our definitions of meaning have become shallow. Ecclesiastes does not erase the search for purpose. It sharpens it. It shifts it away from what is fleeting and toward what is real, even if that reality is hard to face. To read these early verses of Ecclesiastes is to be drawn into a deep examination of what it means to be human. The teacher does not let us escape easily. He wants us to feel the weight of the truth. But he also wants us to reconsider what we are holding on to. What are we building? Why are we striving? Who are we becoming in the process? If everything is hevel, perhaps the goal is not to avoid the mist, but to learn how to walk in it without losing our way. When a man with unimaginable resources, unmatched power, and renowned wisdom pauses to confess that he found no lasting joy in the things most people spend their entire lives chasing, it demands attention. Ecclesiastes chapter 2 is not a theoretical argument or a philosophical exercise. It is a personal reckoning, an unfiltered journal of a king who tested every avenue of earthly pleasure and came back empty-handed. It is as if the teacher, widely believed to be Solomon, opens a private door to his soul and allows the reader to walk through the lavish halls of his former pursuits, only to show that not a single one held the satisfaction he longed for. He begins this confessional chapter not with shame or regret, but with clarity. I said in my heart, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself." This is not the voice of a man wandering aimlessly. It is the voice of someone with intention, with purpose. He set out deliberately to explore whether joy could be manufactured, whether meaning could be discovered through the accumulation of experiences and wealth. He did not hold back. Gardens were planted, pools were built, servants were employed. Gold and silver flowed into his treasuries. He acquired singers and concubines, the delights of the sons of men. His house became a kingdom of indulgence, a temple to the self. And yet, at the end of it all, the refrain returns. It was hevel. The laughter was madness. The pleasures were fleeting. The projects and accomplishments, while grand in scale, offered no permanent joy. There is a startling honesty in this account, one that is rarely found in either ancient or modern reflections. Here is a man who achieved everything his heart desired, and instead of boasting, he offers a lament. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind. The phrase, striving after wind, captures something more than disappointment. It suggests the absurdity of trying to catch what cannot be caught, of chasing shadows and expecting them to offer substance. The teacher is not condemning the things themselves, music, gardens, wealth, even wisdom. He is exposing the illusion that these things, when pursued as ends in themselves, can offer meaning. He had the rare position of being able to fully indulge in every possible pleasure without restraint, and yet the result was a heart unsatisfied and restless. This confession cuts deeply into the modern soul, perhaps more so than any other passage in Ecclesiastes. In a world where success is measured by accumulation, where people are encouraged to build their brands, grow their portfolios, and chase happiness through consumption, the teacher's words echo like a warning. He is not speaking from poverty or lack. He speaks as one who stood at the top and found the view less satisfying than the climb. And in doing so, he offers a mirror to contemporary life, a mirror that many may prefer not to look into. Yet, this reflection is not given in judgment. It is given in love. The teacher is not mocking human desire. He understands it deeply. He does not shame the longing for joy or beauty or accomplishment. He acknowledges them all, but he refuses to pretend that they can bear the weight of ultimate meaning. He lifts the curtain on the stage of life and reveals that even the most successful performances can leave the actor feeling hollow when the lights go down. Perhaps the most haunting part of his confession is his recognition of what happens next. After all the building, after all the gathering, the labor and luxury, he will die and everything he has will go to another. Maybe that person will be wise, maybe a fool. There is no guarantee. The legacy he hoped to secure is as unpredictable as the wind. The deep frustration of this realization is not just about mortality, it is about the loss of control. The teacher wanted to create something lasting, something that would give him peace, but time and death refused to cooperate. In this way, Ecclesiastes 2 is more than a personal story, it is a diagnosis. It diagnoses the human heart's tendency to believe that, if I could just have this one thing, then I would be happy. Whether that thing is a better job, a bigger house, a more beautiful body, or even a deeper intellect, the teacher has already walked that road and returned to say that the destination is not what it promises to be. Not because pleasure is evil or ambition wrong, but because they cannot do what we often ask them to do, give us meaning that endures. There is an important nuance here. The teacher is not promoting asceticism. He does not say, avoid all joy, reject all beauty. His point is subtler and more profound. Enjoyment, when disconnected from deeper purpose, when pursued as the final goal, collapses under its own weight. The pursuit of joy for joy's sake often leads not to happiness, but to exhaustion. This confession, though painful, is also liberating. It frees the soul from the illusion that happiness lies just around the corner of the next success, the next possession, the next moment of pleasure. In confronting the emptiness of these pursuits, the teacher does not negate their value entirely. Rather, he reframes them. They are not gods, they are gifts. But when gifts are mistaken for gods, disappointment is inevitable. The confession of the king is a call back to truth, not the harsh truth of cynicism, but the sobering truth that invites reflection, re-evaluation, and a return to the kind of living that values substance over appearance, presence over performance, and purpose over possession. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 opens not with a declaration, but with a rhythm that almost sings. The words settle into a cadence that resonates deeply within the human experience. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven, the teacher begins. And what follows is not a lecture, but a list. Opposites that seem to mirror the shape of life itself. Joy and sorrow, life and death, silence and speech, love and hate. These are not abstract ideas, but concrete moments that every soul will eventually encounter. The teacher does not merely name them, he honors them. Each one, however pleasant or painful, fits within the structure of time as something appointed, not accidental. Life unfolds in patterns, not in straight lines. Moments come and go like waves that rise and fall with quiet authority. One cannot force the sea to calm nor hold back its rising. In the same way, the seasons of life do not submit to human will. They arrive on their own terms. Some bring warmth, others chill the spirit, but all carry meaning. Instead of trying to prolong the joyful seasons or escape the difficult ones, Ecclesiastes invites the reader to listen, to observe, to understand the moment for what it is. Time, in this vision, becomes something sacred, not because it can be controlled, but because it carries purpose, even when that purpose remains hidden. This poetic passage holds a mirror to the restlessness that often characterizes human striving. Modern life, with its obsession over progress and outcomes, rarely pauses to acknowledge the present season. Everything becomes a race to the next goal, the next success, the next solution. But Ecclesiastes slows the pace. It whispers that time should not be conquered, but embraced. It suggests that every period of life, whether filled with laughter or mourning, building or breaking, is not only inevitable, but necessary. Seeing time through this lens requires humility. The soul must release its desire for total control. Plans, no matter how carefully made, will bend beneath the weight of seasons that were never ours to choose. Wisdom comes not from resistance, but from recognition. When sorrow visits, pretending joy serves no one. When change comes, clinging to what has passed only deepens the ache. But acknowledging the season, living in it fully, without fear or denial, transforms experience into understanding. The teacher's reflection does not offer easy comfort. It does not suggest that each event has a reason we can understand or that all seasons feel equal in worth. Instead, it presents time as something trustworthy in its design, even when that design cannot be mapped out from our limited vantage point. The passage does not explain suffering, but it places it within a larger pattern. A time to weep does not cancel out the time to laugh, just as loss does not erase love. Each holds its own space. Each contributes to the fabric of a life that, in its totality, reveals meaning beyond the sum of its parts. This understanding can lead to a quiet kind of strength. If the season is harsh, it will not last forever. If it is beautiful, it must be cherished because it too will pass. Nothing remains unchanged, and that change is not a curse, but a condition of being alive. Acceptance does not dull the pain of grief or heighten the joy of celebration, but it roots both in reality. It allows for presence. It makes room for wisdom to grow. In Psalm 90 verse 12, the plea is made, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." That prayer echoes the very spirit of Ecclesiastes. By numbering the days, not hoarding them or fearing their end, one begins to live with intention. Life becomes less about mastering time and more about moving with it. Each moment, no matter how mundane or extraordinary, belongs to a greater movement that stretches beyond individual understanding. To live with this awareness is to find freedom. Not freedom from sorrow or difficulty, but freedom from the illusion that such things are mistakes. A time to break down is not failure. A time to be silent is not weakness. These moments, like their brighter counterparts, serve their role. Embracing them does not mean enjoying them. It means honoring their place in the cycle and responding with a spirit that is willing to learn, willing to wait, willing to let go when the time comes. The passage does not just teach about time. It teaches about posture, how to stand within the unfolding of life without collapsing under its weight. It does not ask the reader to explain everything, only to recognize what is happening and to respond with openness. Wisdom, then, is not just about knowing what time it is. It is about aligning one's life with that time, living truthfully within its boundaries, and trusting that even when the purpose is not clear, the pattern is not random. Not all knowledge leads to peace. Not all wisdom offers comfort. In Ecclesiastes, the pursuit of understanding is both honored and interrogated. The teacher does not reject wisdom. On the contrary, he praises it, values it, and applies it with intention. But he refuses to pretend that wisdom can deliver what it ultimately cannot. His exploration into the contrast between wisdom and folly is not a celebration of intelligence, nor is it a dismissal of reason. It is a sober reflection on the limits of both, particularly when seen through the lens of mortality. The passage in Ecclesiastes that compares the wise and the foolish does not deliver a triumphant declaration of superiority. The teacher acknowledges that wisdom has clear advantages. A wise person sees danger and avoids it. A fool walks into it blindly. Wisdom brings clarity, protection, and often prosperity. It sharpens perception and can preserve life. But these benefits are not without caveat. The shadow that falls over both wisdom and folly is death. No matter how carefully one lives, how much insight one gathers, or how prudent the decisions, the outcome remains the same. Both the wise and the fool will perish. This realization turns what could have been a simple lesson into something more layered. The teacher is not dismissing wisdom. He is exposing the vulnerability within it. He is pointing out that even the best guidance cannot shield from the final silence. In Ecclesiastes 2, he says, "Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also." Why then have I been so very wise? It is a startling moment of disillusionment. If wisdom cannot ultimately change the end of the story, what is the point of pursuing it with such devotion? Here lies the tension. Wisdom is better than folly, yet wisdom does not conquer death. Knowledge improves life, but it does not extend it indefinitely. Understanding can protect for a time, but not forever. The teacher's honesty about this limitation is what makes his reflection so potent. He refuses to glorify wisdom as an idol. He resists the temptation to believe that human intellect, no matter how advanced, can master existence itself. This restraint feels both unsettling and refreshing. It is unsettling because it reminds the reader of mortality, and refreshing because it speaks with a kind of freedom that only truth allows. In our own time, the exaltation of knowledge has reached extraordinary heights. With access to information more abundant than ever before, it becomes easy to assume that answers exist for every problem, solutions for every sorrow. But Ecclesiastes warns that knowledge, though valuable, is not omnipotent. It can guide a person through many dangers, but it cannot prevent the end of the journey. Wisdom can brighten the path, but not extend it indefinitely. And yet, even as the teacher uncovers the futility of placing ultimate hope in wisdom, he continues to walk the path of the wise. He does not turn back and embrace foolishness as if it were equally valid. He simply acknowledges the truth. Wisdom is good, but it is not God. It is helpful, but it is not eternal. It is a lamp in a dark room, not the sun in the sky. This distinction matters. It protects the heart from disillusionment and the mind from arrogance. The kind of wisdom that Ecclesiastes quietly affirms is not cold logic or abstract knowledge. It is lived wisdom, a way of seeing the world that recognizes its patterns, its limits, its sacred tensions. It is the kind of wisdom that makes peace with mystery rather than demanding answers. This is the wisdom that knows when to speak and when to be silent, when to act and when to wait. It is not merely about having the right information. It is about cultivating the right posture toward life. In Proverbs, wisdom is often personified as a noble woman, calling out in the streets, offering guidance to those who would listen. In Ecclesiastes, she is more elusive. She whispers from the corners, not with certainty, but with subtle clarity. She does not shout her presence. She reveals herself through experience, through reflection, through reverence. And she always reminds those who find her that she is not the end. She points beyond herself to something greater, something less definable but more enduring. The teacher's exploration of wisdom and folly also touches on the emotional cost of understanding. In Ecclesiastes 1 verse 18, he writes, "For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow." This is not a rejection of learning, but a recognition of its burden. To see clearly is to see pain. To understand the world is to grieve its brokenness. Wisdom does not shield the heart. It opens it. It deepens compassion even as it sharpens perception. This is why many who are wise also carry sorrow, not because they are hopeless, but because they are awake. Foolishness, on the other hand, often carries the illusion of freedom. It moves quickly, laughs loudly, and ignores the depth beneath the surface. But that freedom is hollow. It collapses when reality knocks. It offers escape, not peace. The teacher knows this well, which is why he never glamorizes folly, even as he questions the ultimate return on wisdom. He walks between the two, not with cynicism, but with clarity. He has seen both and understands that wisdom, though limited, is still better. But it must be carried with humility, not held as a weapon or a guarantee. In the end, Ecclesiastes does not resolve the tension between wisdom and death. It does not offer a formula to make it all make sense. But it does something arguably more powerful. It teaches how to live with the tension. It teaches how to walk wisely in a world that will not always reward wisdom, to speak truthfully in a world that often prefers illusions, and to accept limitation without falling into despair. A man sits in silence, not because he has no words, but because the weight of what he sees renders speech hollow. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 opens not with philosophical musing or poetic cadence, but with a sharp, unsparing glance at the cruelty woven into the human story. This is not the meditative reflection of a thinker contemplating time or mortality. This is the raw observation of a soul staring into the eyes of suffering and refusing to look away. The teacher does not soften what he sees. He names it with clarity: the tears of the oppressed, the strength of their oppressors, and the hollow space where a comforter should be. The absence of consolation becomes the focal point. Pain, though common in the world, is made more unbearable by its loneliness. Those who hold power act without empathy, and those who endure injustice find no advocate. The teacher's words carry no theological explanation, no reassurance that this too shall pass. Instead, he acknowledges the pain as it stands. And then he adds a staggering conclusion: the dead are better off than the living, and better still is the one who has not yet seen the evil done under the sun. These are not the words of despair alone. They are the words of a man who cannot unsee what he has seen, and who refuses to comfort himself with hollow promises. He then turns his attention to another form of affliction, one not born of violence, but of envy. Human toil, he observes, is so often driven not by love or purpose, but by rivalry. A man builds and labors not because his work is needed, but because he cannot bear to see another surpass him. Success becomes a contest, and the reward is not joy, but isolation. The picture is bleak, but it is familiar. In a world shaped by comparison and competition, the teacher's words land with unsettling precision. The image of the solitary man toiling endlessly without air, without companion, without end, deepens the critique. This man is not oppressed by others, but by his own ambition. He cannot rest, cannot share, cannot stop. His labor isolates him. His wealth separates him. He has achieved much, yet gained nothing that nourishes the soul. And still, the question rings: for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? The silence that follows that question is heavy, because the answer is often no one. What emerges in this chapter is not only an indictment of systems that harm, but a revelation of the inner poverty that afflicts even the seemingly successful. Injustice takes many forms. It wears the face of oppression, yes, but also the mask of endless ambition, of lonely labor, of competitive striving that erodes community. The teacher's critique touches both the exploited and the self-exploiting. He is not content to merely observe the powerful harming the weak. He also shines a light on the inward rot that can grow in hearts obsessed with achievement. But amid this lament, he introduces a quiet truth: two are better than one. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Here, finally, emerges something close to hope, not in wealth, not in power, but in relationship. Companionship, he suggests, has a strength that solitary striving cannot offer. When one falls, the other can lift him. When one lies cold, the other brings warmth. When one faces danger, the other stands beside him. This is not sentiment, it is survival. In a world marked by injustice and isolation, the presence of another becomes more than comfort. It becomes life. Still, even this glimpse of hope is framed by realism. The teacher concludes with a parable. A poor yet wise youth rises to power, replacing an old and foolish king. Yet those who once followed the youth will eventually turn away. Memory fades. Popularity shifts. The new becomes old, and the cycle begins again. What seems like progress is only movement within a circle. The ache of this passage is not merely personal, it is structural. The world forgets its saviors. The masses abandon their leaders. Even wisdom, when placed on a throne, cannot hold loyalty forever. This is the kind of reflection that pierces modern illusions. We often believe that progress will solve injustice, that success will answer loneliness, that knowledge will protect the vulnerable. But Ecclesiastes offers no such comfort. It asks us to see, not just with our eyes, but with our souls. It names what is wrong, not to discourage change, but to anchor that change in truth rather than fantasy. Justice, it seems, does not flow naturally. It must be pursued. And that pursuit requires more than systems. It requires hearts that do not look away. Crowded storehouses, overflowing treasuries, and anxious hearts. These are the images that begin to emerge as the teacher turns his focus toward wealth. In Ecclesiastes, material accumulation is not condemned outright, but it is put under intense scrutiny. The text does not critique wealth because it is evil, but because it is deceptive. It lures with the promise of stability, security, and control, yet offers none of these with any permanence. The more a person gathers, the more he must guard. The more he owns, the more he fears loss. This is the illusion the teacher exposes, not that wealth has no power, but that it has no peace. In his reflection, the teacher observes a man who hoards riches to his own hurt. This is not the miser caricatured in folktales, but an individual who invests his identity and energy into what can be measured, counted, and possessed. He watches his treasure grow, believing it will one day offer rest for his soul. But when misfortune strikes, everything disappears in a moment. What took years to build is undone in an instant. The man has nothing left to give his son. Worse still, he has nothing left to give himself. And even in moments of abundance, the text suggests sleep escapes him. The abundance of the rich permits them no rest. Wealth, in this narrative, becomes not a blessing but a burden. It promises freedom and delivers anxiety. It promises satisfaction and breeds emptiness. The more one possesses, the less one is possessed by peace. In a quiet but unrelenting way, Ecclesiastes dismantles the cultural obsession with ownership. The teacher asks, without theatrics, what good is it to labor endlessly, only to leave everything to another who may or may not be wise? The unpredictability of inheritance haunts the laborer. His future rests in hands he cannot control, and in hearts he cannot read. All his effort may end in foolishness not his own, but in that of someone who did not earn what he labored to achieve. This insight is not only ancient, it is painfully current. Modern society, too, is shaped by the same preoccupations. Bank accounts grow, investments multiply, real estate is acquired, and reputations are built. Yet the hunger behind these pursuits remains unfulfilled. Consumerism thrives on this hunger. It turns the dissatisfaction itself into a marketplace. It tells the weary soul that perhaps the next purchase, the next promotion, the next possession will finally quiet the noise. But the teacher, having already walked that path, stands at its end and calls back, not in condemnation, but in caution. You will not find what you seek there. The critique deepens as the teacher reflects on labor itself. Work, in and of itself, is not dismissed. But when it becomes a vehicle for self-worth, when it transforms into an endless pursuit of gain, it begins to devour rather than build. The worker toils day and night, accumulating more than he can use, yet loses his joy in the process. Ecclesiastes describes this as a grievous evil. Riches kept to the hurt of their owner. Not because riches are inherently harmful, but because they demand more than they give back. They ask for devotion, vigilance, sacrifice, and in return, they offer only the constant threat of loss. And even if no misfortune comes, the end is still the same. Naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and naked he will return. He takes nothing with him. This is not a poetic metaphor, it is a simple fact. The hands that grasp so tightly in life will release it all in death. In this light, the teacher does not merely critique wealth, he questions the way it shapes the soul. What kind of life forms around the belief that meaning can be stored in vaults or secured by numbers on a screen? What kind of relationships are formed when everything is seen through the lens of ownership and acquisition? Yet in the midst of this critique, a subtle invitation emerges. The teacher does not call for poverty, nor does he romanticize lack. Instead, he points to a different kind of abundance, one that flows not from accumulation, but from appreciation. He speaks of eating and drinking with joy, of taking pleasure in one's work, of finding goodness in the day that has been given. This is not the abundance of quantity, but of presence. It is a richness that cannot be hoarded, that cannot be lost in a market crash, that does not depend on inheritance or investment. It is a way of living that receives rather than grasps. This reorientation challenges not only the economic systems that reward endless consumption, but the internal patterns that measure life by what is owned. Gratitude becomes an act of resistance. Contentment, a form of wisdom. The one who enjoys his food, who delights in his labor, who loves those near him, he possesses something that even great wealth cannot replicate. His sleep is sweet, his hands open, his heart at peace. The teacher does not pretend that this is easy. The pull of wealth is strong. The fear of not having enough, or of losing what one has, runs deep. But Ecclesiastes does not offer a life free of these fears, by giving more to hold on to. It offers freedom by loosening the grip. It invites the reader to consider not how much they can gain, but how much they can receive. And in that reception, something eternal flickers. Not in the vault, but in the moment. Not in possession, but in presence. One might expect a book so full of lament and limitation to offer little more than resignation. Yet Ecclesiastes does something unexpected. Woven through its sobering reflections and unflinching honesty are moments of calm delight, almost as if, in the middle of the storm, the teacher pauses, looks around, and quietly invites the reader to do the same. It is not a grand invitation to transformation or victory. It is something gentler, more immediate. Eat your bread with gladness. Drink your wine with a joyful heart. Let your garments be white. Love your wife all the days of this fleeting life. These are not philosophical abstractions. They are practical, personal, profoundly human gestures. And the teacher holds them up as treasures not to be ignored. It is precisely this contrast between the temporary nature of life and the beauty found within it that gives these simple joys their weight. If life cannot be secured through achievement, extended by wisdom, or satisfied by wealth, then perhaps its value lies not in what can be accumulated, but in what can be savored. The teacher does not call for escape from reality, nor does he encourage indulgence as a remedy for pain. Instead, he draws attention to the sacredness of the present. Not the future dream, not the past success, but the ordinary moment at hand. This reorientation requires a certain humility. To find joy in a meal or comfort in companionship might seem too small a vision for a soul wrestling with the weight of existence. But Ecclesiastes insists otherwise. What if the gifts we overlook are the very gifts we need? What if wisdom, rather than unraveling some secret meaning buried in the cosmos, leads us to stand still long enough to enjoy the light on our face or the laughter of a friend? In Ecclesiastes 3 verse 13, the teacher writes that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. Not the result of striving, not the reward for endurance, but a gift. This is a profound shift. It reframes the world not as a stage for self-creation or conquest, but as a field already sown with quiet goodness. The task is not to invent meaning, but to discover it hidden in plain sight. It is easy to underestimate the courage it takes to live this way. In a world that demands endless movement and measures success by visibility, choosing to rejoice in the unremarkable is a kind of rebellion. It is easier sometimes to chase what is impressive than to cherish what is enough. But Ecclesiastes does not ask the reader to abandon ambition. It asks them to see that joy is not postponed until all is achieved. It waits now in a warm loaf of bread, in the labor of honest hands, in the nearness of someone beloved. The teacher's vision is not rooted in denial. He has already faced death, named injustice, mourned futility. He does not place joy above these things, as if it cancels them out. Instead, he weaves it among them. It is possible, even necessary, to celebrate in the face of fragility. In fact, That celebration becomes more meaningful precisely because it does not ignore the brevity of life. Joy, in this vision, is not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of gratitude. This theology of contentment challenges more than materialism. It also pushes back against the idea that the spiritual must always be serious, distant, or abstract. In Ecclesiastes, God is not only present in the questions, but also in the ordinary. In the meal shared at the end of the day. In the work that feels satisfying, even if not celebrated. In the relationships that provide warmth, not perfection. This is not a lesser kind of faith, it is a grounded one. It finds the divine not in escaping the world, but in learning to dwell in it well. And yet, this way of living does not come automatically. It asks something of the heart. It requires attention, gratitude, and the willingness to receive rather than demand. The world often trains us to look beyond today, to strategize, to climb. But the teacher suggests another path, one marked not by striving, but by noticing, not by conquering, but by delighting. He does not call for dramatic change, only faithful presence. This is not to say life's simple pleasures solve every riddle or ease every sorrow, but they offer an answer of their own. A kind of defiance against despair. A declaration that, even amid brokenness, goodness still exists and is worth pausing for. The meal will not last forever. The laughter may fade. The work may pass to others, but while they are here, they are good. And to embrace them fully is not escapism. It is wisdom. Imagine a king surrounded by splendor, yet speaking not of thrones or triumphs, but of graves. Ecclesiastes does not wait until its final chapters to touch on mortality. It places death at the center of its reflection on life. The teacher does not whisper about it in metaphors or veil it in comforting language. He states it plainly, returns to it often, and treats it not as a disruption of life's story, but as its defining boundary. Every labor, every joy, every sorrow eventually bends toward the same end. And in this truth, he finds not despair, but a rare kind of clarity. What sets Ecclesiastes apart from other ancient texts is not only its unblinking focus on death, but the way it treats this final truth as a lens through which everything else must be seen. The wise die, and so do fools. The rich perish, and so do the poor. The righteous meet the same fate as the wicked. One might expect such observations to unravel any sense of purpose, to invite nihilism or surrender. But the teacher does something unexpected. He uses death not to erase meaning, but to reveal it. The reality of death, once accepted, becomes a powerful force for stripping away illusions. All the striving, all the comparisons, all the anxious accumulation begins to look different when placed against the certainty of an ending. The chase for status or permanence loses its urgency. What matters is no longer how much one builds, but how one lives. In Ecclesiastes, mortality is not the enemy of meaning, it is its sharpest teacher. The clock is not an adversary, but a companion that helps measure what truly counts. One of the most disarming reflections comes in Ecclesiastes 9, where the teacher speaks of the same destiny that awaits all. He names it not with dread, but with precision. The living know they will die. The dead know nothing. Their memory fades, their love and hate vanish, their names dissolve. This is not cynicism, it is a confrontation with the transience of everything humans cling to. Yet immediately after this stark observation, he offers one of the book's most life-affirming exhortations. Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart. Enjoy life with the wife you love, all the days of your fleeting life. This pattern is familiar now in Ecclesiastes, honest recognition followed by an invitation to embrace the moment. The teacher does not use death to undermine joy. He uses it to deepen it. Aware of life's brevity, he urges the reader not to despair, but to live more fully. Not recklessly, but gratefully. Not anxiously, but intentionally. Death narrows the field in a way that sharpens vision. When time is understood as limited, time becomes sacred. In this way, The teacher not only acknowledges death, but reclaims it. He turns what many fear into something that fosters wisdom. To live with death in mind is not to live in fear, but to live in truth. And truth, though difficult, sets the soul on firmer ground. The fantasy of endless time breeds carelessness. The illusion of invincibility fosters cruelty. But the awareness of mortality invites humility, compassion, and presence. Psalm 90 verse 12 echoes this wisdom when it says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." This is not a call to morbidity, but to mindfulness. Numbering the days does not mean dreading them, it means cherishing them. It means understanding that the value of life is not in its length, but in its depth. That even a fleeting moment, lived well, is more sacred than years lost in distraction or striving. Ecclesiastes resists the temptation to turn death into a mere backdrop for philosophical speculation. It brings it forward, examines it, and then asks the most important question. Knowing this, how will you live? The finality of death simplifies life in the most profound way. It cuts through the noise and leaves behind only what truly matters. Relationships, kindness, honesty, joy in the small things. These rise to the surface, not because they are sentimental, but because they endure in memory long after all else fades. The teacher does not seek to escape death, nor does he deny its power. But he refuses to let it cast a shadow so large that it swallows the present. He refuses to let fear of the end rob today of its light. His invitation is clear. Let death teach you how to live. Let it remind you that no moment is too small to matter, that no day is too short to be worthy of joy. Faith, in Ecclesiastes, does not arrive with thunder. It does not command attention with parting seas or blinding lights. Instead, it weaves through the text like a whisper in a crowded room, easy to miss if one is not listening carefully, but undeniably present for those who are. The teacher does not shout the name of God in every passage, but he does not forget him either. Throughout the book, amid reflections on vanity and mortality, there emerges a steady thread, quiet but firm, pulling the reader towards something deeper than disillusionment. This thread reveals itself in the recurring acknowledgments of divine order. Seasons turn not by accident, but by appointment. Moments of joy and sorrow do not drift in randomly, but arrive in their time. The teacher, though burdened by what he cannot explain, often returns to what he cannot ignore, that there is a hand behind the movement of time, a presence that governs the rhythms he so carefully observes. He speaks of God not as a character within the story, but as the one who frames the story, the one before whom all human striving must eventually fall silent. This presence, though subtle, exerts great weight. In Ecclesiastes 3 verse 14, the teacher declares, "I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him." Here, faith does not come from understanding. It comes from recognizing the limits of understanding. It emerges not when answers are found, but when questions lead to awe. The fear of God, often misunderstood as terror, is in this context a reverent awareness, a posture of humility in the face of a vast and intricate mystery. The book does not attempt to systematize God's ways. It does not claim to comprehend divine justice in a world where the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. It acknowledges the apparent randomness of reward and punishment. And yet, through it all, it continues to assert that God remains present, even when his actions seem hidden. The justice of God may not be immediate, but it is not absent. The teacher speaks with conviction that God will judge the righteous and the wicked, and that every deed, even those done in secret, will come to light. This insistence on divine judgment, though it may seem stark, is not meant to instill fear without hope. It serves as a moral anchor. In a world where meaning is elusive and outcomes often unjust, the quiet certainty that God sees, remembers, and will act brings a kind of peace. It shifts the reader's focus away from trying to control outcomes and toward living with integrity. even if human recognition fails, even if rewards are delayed or denied. The teacher believes that nothing is ultimately forgotten in the divine accounting. The humility encouraged by Ecclesiastes is not resignation. It is a wisdom born of reverence, a willingness to accept that human effort has boundaries, and that within those boundaries, one can still live meaningfully. Trust, in this vision, is not naive optimism. It is not the belief that life will always go well. It is the decision to live well even when it does not. It is the decision to honor God, not because one has figured him out, but because one has seen enough to know that he is worthy of reverence. This trust extends into the smallest details of life. The teacher repeatedly returns to the notion that joy in one's work, delight in food and drink, and the love of another person are not just earthly blessings, they are gifts from the hand of God. Even as he confesses the fleeting nature of these pleasures, he never denies their source. God, though often silent, is the giver of all that is good. This theological perspective does not scream through the text. It hums quietly, steady beneath the noise of vanity and toil. Ecclesiastes does not end with triumphant certainty, but with a sacred narrowing of focus. After all the searching, the skepticism, the philosophical wandering, the teacher brings the reader back to a place of clarity. Fear God and keep his commandments. Not because life has been decoded, but because some truths remain regardless of understanding. This is the essence of faith as presented in the book, not blind acceptance, but lived reverence. Not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to walk forward through it. When all has been heard and every path of questioning has been walked, the teacher leaves the reader with a final sentence that speaks with the weight of resolution. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is a closing not built on spectacle or sweeping conclusion, but on clarity. After exploring pleasure, power, toil, wisdom, injustice, and death, the message that remains is remarkably simple and yet profoundly difficult. In a world overflowing with options and distractions, to live with reverence and obedience is the truest act of freedom. This is not fear as we often define it, panic, dread, or servitude. It is the reverence of standing before something infinitely greater than oneself. It is the awareness that life, though complex and often painful, is not without direction. To fear God is to walk in awareness of his presence, his authority, and his mystery. It is to accept that even when understanding fails, faith can stand. Keeping his commandments becomes more than duty, it becomes alignment. A way of living that reflects trust in the one who sees beyond the moment, who holds the seasons, and who gives life its shape. The teacher does not ignore doubt. He does not erase confusion, but he places them within a larger context, a relationship with the divine that does not depend on perfect answers, but on faithful living. The call to obedience is not rigid legalism, but a surrender to a rhythm that transcends the noise of striving. It is a path for those weary of chasing what fades, a way forward for those who have seen the limits of their own wisdom and strength. Ecclesiastes ends not in despair, but in grounding. Its final verse acts like an anchor dropped into deep waters. For all the thoughts that swirl throughout the book, all the contradictions and confessions, it concludes with steadiness. Revere God, live by his word, and trust that he sees. He remembers, he will judge, not to crush, but to make right. This closing does not simplify life's questions, but it offers something far more enduring, a foundation that remains when every other certainty is stripped away. Thank you for spending this time exploring the Book of Ecclesiastes with us. If this message spoke to you, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and leave a comment with your thoughts or reflections. Share this video with someone you care about, because wisdom, when passed on, has the power to deepen lives beyond our own.